By the time your son or daughter turns 18, there's a 93% chance that they've watched pornography. 77% of parents believe that they're responsible for educating their children on this subject, yet way less than half of them actually do it. If you haven't been preparing your children for pornography exposure, now is the time. In this video, I'm going to explain the mindset you should have, how to have these conversations with your children effectively, and what to do if your child is already watching porn. My name is Sathiya Sam. I'm a coach, an international speaker, and an author, and I've dedicated the last 6 years of my life to raising awareness about the harmful effects of pornography. So the first thing we need to establish is that this is no longer a male-focused conversation. The statistics are pretty clear that for every 2 men or boys that watch pornography, there is a female that is watching pornography, young or old or somewhere in between. So this is not a men issue. This is all of us. And whether you have sons or daughters, both of them are at risk. Both of them fall into the statistics that we're talking about. And one of the best examples we've had in the last couple of years is Billie Eilish, this famous pop star who's a girl, and at the age of 10, 11, 12 years old, started watching pornography. As she started to develop physically and get into more relationships, she started to engage basically in the same way that she viewed pornography. She saw certain things being done on the screen. She assumed that was normal. She felt weird about it. She didn't feel good about herself afterwards, but she kind of figured this is just what sex is. This is what a girl's supposed to do. And later on, she found out that those are actually really degrading experiences and that was not normal, but she had no clue because of her early exposure to pornography as a young, innocent girl. And men are falling into these same traps as well. But it's important that we establish whether we're talking about boys or girls, both are relevant for this conversation. Now, you also might be wondering, why are the stats so brutal? Why is it a guarantee pretty much that my son or daughter is going to be exposed to pornography and probably get into some habits watching pornography by the time they reach adult age? Well, there's a few reasons for this. Number one is the industry. Okay, the reality is the porn industry knows that if they can get your child exposed to pornography at a young age, they're more likely to get addicted and to be long-term clients. Remember, the porn industry makes their money from attention. They want clicks, they want viewership, they want engagement, and the more addictive it is, the more you're going to keep coming back and they can keep generating revenue off of your son or your daughter's attention. So when they get exposed at a young age, when the brains are very plastic and they're still developing and they're forming habits and patterns, that's the time where they're the most likely to get hooked. They're also the most vulnerable, and that's why they are very targeted. And it's not direct. They know the little trail that your kid needs to follow online before they stumble upon pornography. But I'm going to tell you right now, none of it happens by accident in today's day and age. All of it is set up by design, and the porn industry is at the center of it all. The second reason that the stats are so alarming is because most kids aren't prepared for early exposure. Nobody's warned them. Nobody's had conversations about it. Nobody's even really had just normal conversations around sex in the house. And so there's no standards or concepts of right and wrong, healthy versus unhealthy, manufactured and produced versus what is real. And so kids come in very innocent, which is a good thing, but they come in very naive, and that makes them a lot more prone to, yes, getting exposed, but then also getting hooked on it because they don't know any better or they weren't prepared for the exposure. And the last reason is that kids get tech too early. I mean, the reality is this conversation would be wildly different if it weren't for technology and online access. Sure, kids were still getting exposed to pornography back in the day through magazines and VHS, but I'm telling you, if you were going to compare the content back then to the content now, it's night and day. You would be praying that they would get exposed to the earlier content if you had to choose, because that would be so much milder and so much less destructive than the stuff that they have access to online. So if you're a parent and you're concerned about your kid's exposure, and maybe you at least have one kid, or maybe you haven't had any kids yet, but you have some kids where they haven't gone fully through sexual development yet, I'm going to talk to you first. And if your kids have already been exposed, we're going to get there in a minute as well. But if you are really trying to ensure that your kids, have a healthy sexual developmental experience, that it's not tainted by pornography, and obviously that they don't become porn addicts later on as adults, there's a couple things that you want to do. Okay, the first part's easy. The second part's going to be a little bit harder. The first thing you can do is you can limit their tech usage. And this is a highly contested subject amongst parents. And I'm not saying that you even need to restrict them or don't let them have a phone. I'm really not of that opinion. We have to be realistic about the world that we live in. However, you can be strategic and you can be intentional about how they engage with tech. For example, it's one thing for them to have access to the TV that's in the family room. It's another thing for them to have their own cell phone. Which one do you think they're more likely to get exposed to pornography on? Kind of answers itself, doesn't it? Okay, let me ask you another question. If they got exposed to pornography on both devices, on which device do you think they're more likely to stay watching? Probably the phone. So again, I'm not saying your kids shouldn't have phones. I'm just saying, why do they need a phone? Well, if you want to communicate with them, if you want them to communicate with you, maybe you get a phone that only has that capacity until they're a little bit older and it makes more sense for them to have some more access. I'm just giving you ideas. You'll have to figure out what's best for you. But the principle here is we want to try to be intentional about the environments that they're in when they're engaging with technology. To number one, reduce the chances that they get exposed. And number two, to increase the likelihood that if they do get exposed, they move on and they don't stay stuck on it. It's when they dwell on it that we start to create problems and they're more likely to come back again and again. Now, the other important piece here is if you do give your child a cell phone, or even if you give them access to the TV, at some point you need to have a conversation about pornography. And you need to let them know, hey, when you go online, you might encounter some pornography. Pornography is XYZ. You're going to explain it. If you encounter pornography, that's not really good content for you to be watching. You're not going to get in any trouble, but I just want you to tell me so that I know you ran into it and we can make sure that you're safe and protected when you're online. Again, it doesn't have to be perfectly crafted, but the point is you need to create a game plan of, hey, when you get exposed, XYZ needs to happen. And most importantly, the one thing you do want to craft is you will not get in trouble. Your kids need to hear that and you need to actually back that up, because otherwise they're not going to come to you and they're going to go elsewhere or they're going to keep it a secret. And then later on, you're going to find out about this addiction that they were harboring. Now, the second thing that you're going to do as parents, and this is actually true even if your kids have already been exposed to pornography, is you want to have conversations with them about sexuality and sex in general. And if your kids haven't been exposed, then you want to start today. I mean, I'm talking as young as 3 or 4 years old. You can start to have these conversations, age appropriate, obviously. Okay, like use some wisdom here. But the earlier that you have conversations, the more likely it is that later on, when these conversations get more complicated and they might have the temptation to keep things hidden, they're probably still going to come to you if you have built up a history of having conversations that were safe, that were healthy, and that were relatively comfortable for them around the subjects of sex and sexuality. If they haven't heard you talk about it, if you haven't brought it up, if you kind of get cringy and awkward and weird every time it comes up, then when they get exposed to pornography, they're not going to come to you. They're going to go to their friends or they're going to start Googling things online. So start early, have the conversations often. What you're trying to do is build a foundation of sex as an acceptable subject to discuss with my parents, so that later on there's a foundation you can build on as they start to develop sexually and probably, unfortunately get exposed to pornography or have questions around, early sexual experiences and all that kind of stuff. Having these conversations isn't easy. That's why I recommend you do it early and often. And if the first time you have it, it's a little bit awkward or you're a little bit weird or you say something that's not right, it's an ongoing discussion. They're going to be in your life for a really long time. Don't sweat it. You get to have lots and lots of conversations about this. That's the idea. But the point is you need to start now. The sooner you start, the better, because it's going to build a deeper foundation so that you can go further along with them as they start to become adults. Now, If your child has already been exposed to pornography, I want to say number one, I know how scary that can be. In fact, we have parents reach out to us every week on Instagram, very concerned, like just kind of spelling out worst case scenario. My son's going to become a porn addict, or my daughter's going to go sleep around with 100 guys. I just want to let you know this is a very manageable situation. And this is coming from somebody who got exposed to pornography in the computer lab of his Christian school when he was 11 years old, before broadband internet and smartphones. I still developed a 15-year-long addiction, and I got clean on the other side of it. It's not like if they get exposed, they're going to become addicts and their lives are going to be terrible. Okay. But if you know that they've been exposed to pornography, what we want to do is be proactive. We want to nip this thing in the bud as quickly as we can. Now, what we're not going to do is we're not going to punish them. Okay. We're not going to guilt trip them. We're not going to tell them how bad it is and that they're so terrible and that they can never do that again and make me promise and XYZ. And we're not going to raise our voices or get all stern about it. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to reverse the wrongs that we've done as parents, which might have been not talking about it. Billie Eilish, the pop star that I referenced earlier, she said that pornography was her sex ed. The only conversation she had about sex growing up was from pornography. It wasn't from her parents. It wasn't even from her peers. She learned it all from pornography. So look, if your kid is watching pornography, it's time for you to broach that subject with them. Even if you feel like you're late, better late than never, because your child wants to talk to you about it. They really do, but they probably don't feel comfortable to do so. It's too risky for them to stick themselves out and risk you finding out, but then maybe getting upset or punishing them or whatever. They don't know what the consequences are, no matter what you've communicated to them. So make the lines of communication open. And if they haven't been opened, now is the time to do it. So that's the first thing, is you got to start talking to them about it. Number two is don't be naive about this. Okay. Don't pretend like that maybe they have been exposed, maybe they haven't. If you know that they have, then let's ask them about it. Let's ask, like, let's say, hey, pornography is out there. I got exposed to pornography when I was XYZ. I've heard of a lot of people whose lives have been affected by pornography. I know you're online quite a bit. Have you ever encountered it? You can set this up in a way where it's like, hey, I've seen it before. A lot of other people have. Have you? That's very different than, have you been watching pornography? Or, I found pornography on your device. What's this about? We want to try to lower or really keep their defensiveness at an all-time low. The safer this conversation feels, the bigger the bridges that you can build with them, so that, again, you can have future conversations. They come to you with information, and hopefully they ask you for some advice and some input along the way. Now, if you reach this point, where you've done well enough that your kids are asking you for some input, they're asking you for advice, I need you to hear something loud and clear. This is maybe the most important point of this video. It is absolutely critical that you are the example. In other words, if you don't want your kids watching pornography, you can't watch pornography either. There's no such thing as some double standard. Oh, do as I say, not as I do. Sorry, that's not how it works. If you're really serious about your kids being safe and protected and developing in a healthy way, you need to set the standard. And I can't tell you how many fathers have come to me, especially, and mothers too, who say, I want my kid to stop watching pornography, and I just don't know what I should do. And the first thing I ask them is, do you watch? Are you struggling with it? Well, yeah, a little bit, but I'm really more concerned about my kid. And I have to just level with them. Actually, if you want your kid to get free, start with you. Because in your home, it's not about what you teach, right? It's not about what's taught. It's about what's caught. And your kids can tell. They can just tell if something's off in your messaging, if you're saying one thing but you're doing another. Kids have very acute BS detectors. They will sniff it out right away. And I'll tell you, I was addicted to pornography for 15 years, and it turns out that my dad was as well. And I didn't find out until much later on in my recovery journey. And for all those years, I wondered, what's wrong with me? Dad seems to have it figured out, and nobody else in my family has struggled. And, I'm a good kid. I grew up in a pastor's home and went to Christian school. And, I internalized it, and it actually worsened my addiction and my experience. I suffered in more isolation, more silence, more shame, because my dad didn't open up about it. And when he did open up about it, it actually led to one of the biggest breakthroughs in my recovery. So not only should you be the example, but additionally, you can share about your shortcomings, and that can really empower your kids. It's not going to lower their standard. It's going to remind them, oh, wow, you struggled, but you overcame it. That's why you got to work on that overcoming part. And I guess if it caused you all this damage, then I'm just going to be smarter and get this thing nipped in the bud now so that I don't have to experience all the hardship that you did. It can actually work wonders for your kids and really inspire them to do better. But you have to, number one, be transparent about your struggle. And number two, make sure that this struggle ends in a success story so that they know it's possible and that you are practicing what you preach. So if you are a parent and you want more help supporting your child and maybe you want to understand what they're going through a little bit better, I highly recommend you check out the docu-series Brain, Heart, World. The link is in the description, and that'll be a really high value resource for you. And if you're a parent and you're struggling yourself and you're ready to be the example to your children, check me out on Instagram. We're very active over there. I respond to all my DMs. I'd love to hear from you and to see how I can help and support you. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure that you like it and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.